Welcome to Bon Mots, where we'll be applying the Manzer or Mosi Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or Mots! This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals movie reviews. We're here talking about a Oscar contender tonight, The Big Sick, starring Kumail Nanjiani, and I think we were all pleasantly surprised by this one.
I enjoyed this film greatly, and you're about to hear why.
I'm going to be your host, Steve Ramosi, and I'm joined tonight by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I came in with my prejudices and was proven wrong.
And Scott Thurlow.
And my cold heart enjoyed this film quite a bit.
So we're going to kick the funny log line, as we often do, and especially for comedies. We'll kick it over to Scott.
All right, so I've come up with, if you know this reference, Girlfriend in a Coma, It's Serious.
Dig it, I dig it. So let's get started talking about it. We're going to start off, and we are renaming the intro, body, conclusion section of this to just plot, because that's kind of what it is.
The general plot.
So we're going to start off with Ian.
This is the story of a young Pakistani man in America torn between two cultures. His Pakistani roots and his traditional parents, and his desire to become a stand-up comedian and pursue a white girl. She, unfortunately, they get into a relationship, they break up, she falls into a coma, and he realizes, a medically induced coma, I should say, from a very...
Complications.
Yes. And he realizes that he loves her and comes to terms with her parents, his parents, and
himself and her.
Exactly. Everything. And there's a very, a movie with a lot of heart. And that's basically the plot there. And I came in expecting this to be a very soft rom-com.
An unsufferable-ish kind of rom-com.
Yeah, and I wasn't looking forward to this film. And it is constructed in a way perfectly for this type of movie. It's never... There's cringe, but it's never too much.
But on purpose.
Yeah. Purposeful cringe.
There's a lot of, the main character, Camille, has a lot of self-deprecation. And you get a good glimpse into both what it's like to try to become a stand-up comedian, what it's like being from an immigrant family in America, and
your modern dating angle, kind of as well.
Yeah, and a lot of philosophy about the nature of love and how families forgive and deal with issues. I don't know. I thought it was an overall well done work.
Yeah, I agree. It's a to try and because we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff as we go on throughout this episode, but to try and stick to the plot, I thought it was really well paced.
Yes, agreed.
The romance between the two of them.
His girlfriend's name is Emily, by the way.
Yes, and his wife, not the actual real Emily, is his wife now.
This entire story is also based on his actual personal experience.
And his wife Emily did actually fall into a coma after they had, I guess, broken up, and they wrote this together, which I thought was a really cool angle as well, and just an interesting thing. But they had, and I'll probably reiterate this later when we talk about characters, but they had a ton of chemistry, and I think a lot of that came down to how well this was written, and how much Kumail himself, the actor and the writer, had invested in the script and in the movie itself. I loved. So it's a very obvious three parts, right?
Yep.
It's the dating.
I was going to say that myself.
The coma, and so it's the dating where he gets to know her. It's the coma where he gets to know her family, and then it's the after coma where they kind of
somewhat reconcile eventually.
They kind of get to know each other again on these weird terms of like having gone through this thing separately. Like it was nothing to her. Like it was no time at all to her. She was asleep the whole time, but to him, it was a completely life-changing experience. So I thought that all of that was paced really well.
Yes.
I liked all three of those parts a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give this film a perfect score on those, in terms of the plot, on those merits.
I am also going to give it a 3 out of 3 on plot. Yeah, like, so, as Ian mentioned briefly, that he and I personally were a bit more unsure of like what this film is going to be like going into it. But early on, it got me. I was invested, and it would carry me through. There was never a dull moment, if you will. I don't think it, like you said, I can't say it better than myself, that it's paced perfectly. The running length is exactly what it needs to be. The story is exactly what it needs to be. And there's a lot to it, which was, like you said, we'll speak about shortly. But plot-wise, it was exactly the way it had to be, and I enjoyed every single moment of it. So I don't have much more to say. I'm giving it, like I said, 3 out of 3 on plot.
I'll go a little bit deeper, quite briefly, with the fact that the first act of their romance, you can see why they were drawn to each other, and you saw both their the real aspects of like a dorky comedian who's into B-horror movies is pursuing a girl going her master's degree in psychology.
Yeah.
And I bought their romance, and it's probably true that I bought it precisely because it's two people writing about their actual romance and how they felt like.
Exactly.
So you got to see what drew each other. And the tragic second act, when she actually is in the hospital. And all of this is really elevated by the performances in this, which we'll get to later on. But watching him suffer and grow as a character through this event, I don't know, everything in here felt very real. And it's a real story, but it never felt overly Hollywoodized.
Yes.
It felt all very
down
grounded.
to earth.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to give it a full 3.
Now, well said, and I agree. Just to add on, good call.
All right, yeah. So 3's all around for that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go on to themes, and I'm going to take themes. There are surprisingly a lot of themes in this. You have the love story, like how you approach dating and
Sure.
like falling in love and that type of thing, which is like kind of the outer theme. There's a lot having to do with both of their families, and the importance of family to each one of them is really obvious, I think, throughout. The Kumail's family, coming from Pakistan, is very traditional. You can tell that despite the fact that they are sticklers for the rules, I guess, they really do care about him despite the fact that he is not the same way as them, right? And despite the fact that they kind of have to follow their own rules, when he's about to leave for New York at the end of the movie, his dad comes and gives him food. Excuse me. His dad comes and gives him food that his mom made as his favorite, but she won't even, like, she's in the car, but she won't even look at him.
No, his dad basically says, "You're still connected to family, but here's some food, and make sure you text us when you get there."
Yeah. Have a good life. I'll never talk to you again, but text us when you get there. Like that. It was nice little moment. Perfect little jokes.
To what you
said. That, to an extent, I really like that part because it is a very specific cultural thing, but it's also a very universal thing at the same exact time. So like that was really good. You have they talk a lot about like the healthcare system, and that's kind of a theme. Like they don't talk a lot about it, but they go into it a little bit and like kind of how it works. Like just being bombarded by 5 different doctors telling you all kinds of shit, and like it's a lot to take in. Like that is an experience that a lot of people have had, and I'm not sure if exactly I want to call it a theme, but I think it kind of is. I think it kind of verges on that.
It's there, sure. They don't explore it as deeply as the other things you mentioned, but it certainly is part of the film.
There is, and I'll just do one more because there's a few more, but I'll let you guys explore a little bit more. But there's also the one more which I want to talk about, which is getting to know like the family of
A significant
a
other.
person, a significant other, but it's the same kind of way with like friends, families, and things like that. You know, like that's such a weird experience and like just a harrowing experience because you don't often like those people are not often all that much like the person that you got to know.
Yeah.
Like they came from that, but they're not the same people, so it's always weird, and like that's exactly the case in this movie. So I really liked that aspect of it as well. And I'll turn it over to you guys, and if you want to talk about anything else.
Well, I think that beyond this, to bring up your medical care part, I think they capture what it's like to deal with a family member or a loved one in the hospital.
Yeah.
And you wanting to like have your input, but having to give up control to experts, where even if you're questioning their judgment. And it's an interesting aspect. And to that point, you also have the two families there, both trying to make decisions for their children that might not be for their best interests, but the parents think it's for the best interests.
Right. They like to think that, but it may
So
not.
Emily's parents wanting to move her out of the hospital to a different one when that could be life-threatening.
Yeah.
But they think it's the best choice, where you have Camille's parents wanting him to marry a Pakistani girl because that's...
And follow the tradition and so forth. Yeah.
Now, I have a kind of a personal aspect here, is that I teach in Patterson, and there's a huge Bengali population there. And I know of some of my students have arranged marriages. I might actually be going to a wedding in the coming years in Bangladesh to a woman that has been promised to like a friend of mine, and there is a like the aspect of like that cultural definition of love is, and how they deal with it here versus like that kind of American view of love and the Pakistani view of love is such an interesting aspect that you don't get to see much like in everyday culture.
When he says like, you know what they call arranged marriage in Pakistan? They call it marriage, and what was it? Love marriage, I think is what
romance.
Romance.
Yeah,
what he said.
He's like, that is not good. So like it's coming from these two like very opposite definitions of love in these families. But I also love, I think this is part of the themes as well, and I'm sorry to I don't mean to like derail you, but like it's that both of these two are definitely like kind of oddballs, and that's the reason that they fall in together. I think that's a theme as well, like, you know, that type of, those two types of people coming together.
Yes, and I wanted to add on one more. I think everything you said, of course, is in the film and dressed very well. But really, if you boil it down, it's like figuring yourself out, like who you are and want to be, based on like your family and your experiences and where you come from and what you're dealing with. So like all that sort of like melds together, I think, and it's all very well addressed.
Also, another aspect that I want to bring up, and again, going back to my personal thing, is the idea of nation, like Islam in America, in the sense of coming from a traditional country that there's a lot of prescribed rules to a religion, and then people who are Americanized having to cope with that. I have students who like don't eat pork because that's against their religion, but drink and don't pray because there's certain rules that they hold on to, and there's other ones that they reject. And watching someone find their way through that kind of tradition was really a neat, and a voice you don't get to hear much.
I will say this to you guys and to any of our listeners and viewers: if you like this movie, you might also like Master of None. Aziz Ansari does a really good job talking about the same types of things, but he is allowed a much wider space to talk about because he has a show.
Sure.
So like
It's not as condensed.
he'll dedicate an entire episode to like he goes off and like you know, gets his cousin to eat pork or whatever, like stuff like that, and like, you know, he'll have a whole episode about that. Like, so all these conversations are happening a lot more now, and I think it's really cool to see that type of thing getting out there more.
This one I've seen a little bit of Master of None. They're both tackle these subjects well, and a voice that hasn't been there prior.
Yeah,
I agree. I'm giving it a strong.
I'm giving it a very strong
give it a one as well.
Exactly.
But I do want to like just three little parts.
Okay.
And the thing that this movie does really well is it says little things quickly, gets in, gets out, says exactly what it needs to say.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it feel like they're hanging by a thread. Do you want to say one of them? Because I know one of them is something that you mentioned.
Is it about the female perspective?
Yes.
I was really impressed because for a lot of this movie, they play off the potential arranged marriages as jokes. Like women, in a sense, desperate.
It's a recurring gag, essentially.
And then the last one they show flips it and shows it from like how difficult it is for a woman who has to, in a sense,
in that position,
sell herself as a wife to this. And I was very happy that they had that scene in there.
Yeah,
it was a good moment, and it added to the greatness of the film overall. And everything we just said is well handled, well addressed. Definitely giving it a 1.
Another little scene that like gave a tip of the hat to nurses was the scene where Kumail talks to the nurse, and she is willing to like talk to him and tell him what's going on, where the doctors really weren't. She tells him that she thinks moving like the hospital will do it because it's good for them to not have that on their plate, but it would be bad for them to move her, and like she gives it to him straight, and that's kind of
nice
where
little
he comes
touch.
from.
Yeah.
Like,
You're
that's
right.
and like that's a thing that I've heard a lot is like if you want to talk to somebody who really knows what's going on, but like has time for you, try to talk to one of the nurses. And then the other thing is the other little one is the scene that they have when Ray Romano stays at Kumail's apartment, and he just like goes on this rant about how he cheated on Emily's mom and all this stuff, and like it just has a little like, hey, nothing's like these. When you met these two, they seemed like a really good couple. They seemed pretty perfect, and like that was kind of like, oh, shit is kind of going off the rails for these guys.
Problems, yeah.
But it's also that theme of the forgiveness in love and family.
Yeah.
And that like.
Yeah, it all sort of intertwines. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm giving it all a strong 1.
I agree. A very strong one for this.
Gotta respect the film for how it handled it all.
And let's go to we'll see how this one goes. Antagonist with Scott.
All right. So of course my traditional thing is like on the surface, it's the random misfortune of life, like getting hurt and then having to be induced into a medical coma in order to like figure out what's wrong with you, and that is basically like that's the big problem. The big sick is the titular plight of the film. However, I don't like that's my normal answer, right? That's my go-to like thing to say. And Steve-O and I often go back and forth on this specifically with each other that there's nothing like necessarily antagonizing these characters beyond that. But maybe this goes back to what you said, something in themes is figuring out who you are and dealing like with having new relationships, with having a new significant other, and then something befalls them, and then having to go through that with their family as well, who you don't know very well, having to deal with your own familiar issues, as you said. So like, certainly Camille felt antagonized by some of this stuff, but it was more like him like, again, dealing with the clash of cultures, if you will, and like him trying to figure out who he is and who he wants to be and what he wants to do and how he views himself in relation to all those things. So like that might be a good antagonist. There's certainly nothing really corporeal. Again, like there's no character or instance of anything like actively antagonizing anyone per se. But given that, like, you know what, I'm kind of unsure on this one at this point. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Given that, what do you guys think?
The Montreal Film Festival.
Okay.
No, seriously, if he's antagonized by anything, it's the culture clash between growing up as an American with his family, the traditional Pakistani roots, and him, as you said, growing to try to the conflict between the love of his family and he doesn't want to be exiled by them, and his his desire to make his own way in America, and really, any moments of antagonism he has, he initially rejects Emily, or when their fight happens, partly because he doesn't want to be he loves her, but he doesn't want to be thrown out of his family. Right. And that's the only kind of real antagonism I felt, aside from the fact him dealing with a sick loved one.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think, Steve-O?
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like this is kind of almost like the antagonist of 1,000 Cuts.
Yeah.
Where it's like
good call.
It's like none of these things are really a
deal breaker, we'll say.
as far as giving antagonist a 1,
Yeah.
If I give it a 1, it'll be because you have the culture clash, you have the family problems, you have the
relationship problem.
Not only family problems with his family, but family problems with her family at first too. You have
disease.
You have
Sickness.
you have his girlfriend being in a coma for a large portion of the movie. You have the breakup that is weighing on both of their minds, and especially hers after she wakes up again. Like, there's a lot of things that are antagonizing to Camille
Various degrees. Yeah.
in this movie, and also to Emily to an extent. Like, all of these things, if I'm going to give antagonist a 1, it's because of that. Like, there is antagonism from the world
Antagonism
throughout this movie.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say to start off with. But go on.
I might have just convinced myself to give it a 1. I don't know.
The funny thing is, you might have just convinced me to do it because, like, again, like as I mentioned, we often find ourselves in this spot where, like, I'd be like, "Life is the antagonist." Like, yes, thank you. That's always going to be the case. But as you said, I like the way you phrase it. Like, it sort of stacks upon each other, right? So like, you can sort of like give a little like point, like little credit here to this one antagonistic aspect, if you will, right? Everything you just mentioned, the list you just ran down, and if all those add up to a 1, then that might be the case to give it a 1.
So I'm going to give it a 1 because you see the progression of the protagonist, Camille, over the course of this. He is initially faced with certain obstacles, which is leaving his past behind in a lot of ways, and leaving his culture's past behind. And he's confronted with an issue of the disease, which makes him grow as a character and become who he is nowadays. He had his hero's journey. And so there is definitely something there that he is overcoming, even if it's not 100% defined. So I'm going to give it a 1.
I think that's well said. I think you guys both convinced me. I was sort of unsure about it, but I think now, having said that, I'm going to give it a solid 1.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree. I think I'm going to give it a 1.
Yep.
All right, so that's 1 all around for that. Protagonist, Ian.
I just kind of gave my protagonist speech there. And here's the thing: is this movie is a really kind of classic structured, like
It's something you haven't seen before per se. Kind of.
and this thing is like it doesn't. It's your character. It's a biopic, and it's as we did with Elizabeth Camp talk. It's like the autobiographical thing. He's looking in the past, saying, "I was always destined to become this like famous comedian." I've seen his work before. He's I think he's quite good. I was meant to be with Emily. These are the trials we went through, and it's all has a feel of looking back upon events to come to a creation of a cohesive narrative.
I mean,
and that works for me, and I think it was well done, and the actor is very likable.
in fact, part of his act, if you will, like at least a side version of his, not stand-up per se, but like a one-man show of him like explaining his history and like how it relates and like and so forth. So like that, even that was
such
like,
an obvious
organically
like,
there, kind of
like obvious in a good way. Such an obvious like just showing
parallel.
his character's growth.
But it's not. It's his initial one-man show is about Pakistan.
Then it becomes about him.
About him.
Exactly.
And that's again him leaving his past behind. It's a classic story, and I don't think you fault it for that. I mean, I think it did it very well.
Yeah.
That classic storyline, and I have to give him credit.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. Sorry, Steve, I'll just jump in because I don't have much to say, but just to build on a little bit of E's point, I like Camille a lot. He was likable. He had flaws, clearly, and he was faced with, as we said, antagonistic elements that he was able to overcome, and in fact had an arc and bettered him as a person, and he was evolved into the kind of person he wanted to be, or at least saw himself as eventually. So
Yeah,
I think he's very strong, and like I said, very 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 well rounded. So
I agree. I think Camille is a very strong character. I don't know if I want to. I almost want to put Emily as a protagonist as well, because I feel weird making her a supporting character.
You're absolutely right.
Like
tough because
not that like she's not nearly as much of a protagonist obviously as Camille is, but her presence is, even when she's asleep,
It's
her
weighing on
presence
him.
is
Yeah.
as strong as his, I think. And I think
That's true.
I think you know what, I am gonna make her a protagonist as well, because you are, like, despite the fact that you're following Kumail,
See, that was going to be my
you're
anti-point to that.
you're following Emily's story. This isn't Kumail's story, really. I mean, it is to
It's
an
both
extent.
of theirs, I guess you're
But
saying.
like, this is the story of like, she is the one who's like really fucking experiencing. Not experiencing, but she's the one who's going through shit, and like he is there experiencing it and like going through shit because of that.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm gonna make her a protagonist, and I think they're both very strong.
Do you remember Kurt Vonnegut's the one with ice Cat's Cradle?
Yes.
Yep.
And the reason they're talking about how like there are two people meant to be on the road of life together, and so, I forget what the actual terms are, but something for two. That's what I feel like. It's that they're in because of the story they're telling. Yes, you're following Camille as their protagonist, but this is the point when their lives intertwined to the point where one doesn't exist without the other. And I think that argument, because she shaped him into the man he wanted to be,
Right.
and she also grew from the thing, and they grew together. And I think that you can make that argument there that...
I will also say this.
I'll go with it.
This is not a story without Emily. This is a story without Kumail. You know, this is still
Sure.
this could
I mean,
be a
that's-
good movie without Kumail
That's a
in it.
semi-humorous sort of point, but
This
I think
is
you
not
got
a
me.
story without her.
Yeah,
I would have watched Ray Romano.
Yeah.
I think you convinced me that I was going to make her, in fact, the most important supporting character, Steve-O, but I think you just got me with that case, so I definitely will combine them and give them an even stronger one, really. Like,
Yeah.
when she was on screen, when she had, like, waking, speaking parts, she was quite excellent, and like, I think one of you said they had great chemistry together, which is absolutely true.
Right.
So, yeah, and you're right, her presence and influence and, like, effect upon him and everyone else is certainly felt throughout, so good call.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's ones for all of us, right?
Yep.
All right. So let's move on to supporting, and I'm gonna kick us off with that. I don't remember her parents' names.
Something and Beth. Terry and Beth.
Terry and Beth. That's right. Terry and Clough. Yeah. Ray Romano and
I'm
I forget
blanking on
the actress's
I'm
name.
blanking on her name,
But
too.
they are both awesome in this role. Kumail's parents and his brother, actually more so than his parents, I
Yeah.
would say, are all really good as well. I actually want to give a shout out to the woman that you mentioned earlier, who has her the arranged marriage, the woman that was supposed to like, he drives her home at one point, and Emily's in the coma at that point. And I believe it's like the very beginning of it, or is
It's
it
like
before?
midway through.
No, it's after they broke up.
No, she's in the
she's in the
hospital.
coma. Yeah. Okay. So like they go back, and she basically gives this big speech about how hard it is to be a part of this culture. She just wants to settle down. She wants it to work, whereas he is not interested. And I think that
Because he's
That-
in love with Emily, or
not
realizing
only is
he's
that
in-
a really well written part, but that actress does a very good job of
Yes.
emoting that part, and I really like that. I'm trying to think of.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna give a shout out to his like comedian crew.
Yeah.
Bo Burnham, I believe, is part of it.
Yeah.
He's there, and his Camille's roommate Chris, who's like the worst comedian of them all, and Molly's the other like the cadre of comedians that I hang out with. Like I thought they portrayed it like I would imagine that what it's like if you're a wannabe stand-up comedian, like hanging out with your little crew and so forth.
That's a great point. Their banter is fucking amazing.
So,
So good.
that's the angle I wanted to bring up if one of you didn't mention before. But I certainly agree. Like the families are like the biggest looming supporting characters, and they all did a great job. And and his brother Naveed was also like had some great like not stole any scenes per se, but some of their interactions were quite good or quite enjoyable, and also like earnest and.
I love when he, at the end, basically went in disguise to his brother's show
With the
Yeah.
glasses
after
on.
the brother was exiled from the family.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah, it was a nice touch. You're right. Yeah.
this movie, secondary, supporting cast here, really made this film without all like strong performances across the board.
Exactly. Agreed.
Even like minor characters had
Even the nurse,
some
like
depth
you mentioned.
to them.
Yeah.
And everyone sold their part and went above. Again, as you mentioned, I want to give a shout out to Ray Romano and the actress whose name we're forgetting. I apologize. As Emily's parents, this movie would not have worked without those performances.
100% agree.
They're great.
Yeah.
I will say, as much as everyone other than the comedian friends were like supposed to be normal people, they were all very clearly professional comedians because they were all hilarious and like their comedic timing was perfect.
Yeah. So it kind of works. It's sort of like a meta-ish.
Yeah. But I think clearly we're all going to give this pretty strong ones.
Yeah.
And let's move on to dialogue. Let's talk about that a little bit, Scott.
Hell yeah. So, I mean, this is probably one of the easiest questions to give a 1 to because it's so snappily written. Like we said, so organic and it's funny when it needs to be. And it's some of the jokes are like just spot on. And then when it's invoking like awkward cringeworthiness, like just doing it completely on purpose. And that works really well too. Like the interactions of everybody. So like, yeah, like we just said, when the cadre of comedians are bantering back and forth and then you switch to like juxtapose yourself with scenes when Camille's trying to become friendly with Emily's parents. And like at first it's very standoffish, all of it worked really well. And because of his sort of self-deprecating kind of style, a little bit here and there, like it sold it so well. Every single line of dialogue that came out of everyone's mouth was solid as hell, and everyone did a great performance with the lines they were given. So I can't say enough really about it.
I imagine there was a good bit of improv, especially
I can see that,
the comedians,
yeah, for sure.
Working. So
let's see the outtakes of this, like
I think that would be amazing.
different lines they tried when they were doing it.
There are great outtakes for this.
But I really don't have much more to say beyond that. It was like just goddamn, not even beyond solid, just spot on. And I loved every single line pretty much. And I remember some of the good jokes that I might say off air. But yeah, like this clearly they put a lot of work in the script and it shows.
Yeah. So I think that, well, I wasn't sure whether to mention this in dialogue or style. I think it goes into a little bit of both of them, but it speaks to the script. And there are so many good, really, really good callbacks in this movie to like things that happened earlier, and it speaks to how much attention was being paid to the script when it was being written, and I'm sure rewritten a bunch of times because that's how it goes.
Like I said, it's polished to all hell, and it definitely shows through.
There are so many excellent callbacks, and right at the end, there's a really good one of her. Like, so the beginning scene is Camille doing stand up, and Emily shouts "woo," and that's how they meet. And then at the end, she does the same thing. Awesome callback, not too sappy, not too.
It's perfectly
dramatic.
bookended. It.
I was really concerned because this is to some extent a romantic comedy. That when he was like leaving for New York, he was going to say "fuck it," like jump out of the car and go run to her or whatever. I'm super happy that did not happen, and that like
that would have been so super cliche.
Like this movie does such a good job, and this is I am kind of getting a style a little bit now, but like this movie does such a good job of subverting the obvious tropes.
Right.
But the dialogue itself. Incredible, well written, really snappy, really funny throughout. Just there was no. I don't think there was any 5-minute period in this, even in the darkest depths of this movie, where it was like just sad as hell, where I didn't laugh, and like that's saying something really important about how this movie went.
And I like that they had a number of comedians with different styles in there. So
different sticks.
Camille's comedy is very, very dry. But then you have like Bo Durham, who's I wouldn't say energetic, but he has completely different comedy. So I'm getting different types of laughs and different types of humor throughout this, and they mix really well. So
I agree.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be
ones on that.
Ones all around.
Yep.
It's looking pretty good for this movie. All right, Ian, why don't you tell us about style?
So this and Antagonist were the ones I was considering giving a 0 to. Because should I reward this movie for not committing the sins of
previous lesser rom-coms?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's done well, but I didn't pay attention to the style of this. It wasn't bad by any means, which is a good thing. I didn't pay attention to it, but nor was it like I was more focused on the dialogue and the jokes, the characters, and the narrative of it versus anything stylistically. Yeah, there's some great set design, which gave a lot of looks into Emily and Camille. But beyond that, I don't know. I'm kind of wavering on this.
That's the thing. I'm sort of with you on that exact point because it was perfectly fine. But like I guess I want to say like cinematography wise, there was nothing amazing. But that the thing is like this movie isn't that kind of movie. Right? They're not going for like incredibly sweeping like epic shots or anything because it's a character piece and like just like a biopic. So on that front, like I may be defaulting to a 0, but through no fault of the film itself per se, right? It's like, I mean, what style do you want in a Ramesh com like such as this?
It's not. I don't know if more style would have benefited this movie, but I just feel that this almost.
Right. It was exactly what it needed to be, which is why it sort of was in the background. So I may just give it again, like, and perhaps medley. I'm not sure if this is a perfect movie. So if I'm going to take off points of anything, it might be here. Mm-hmm. But again, don't get me wrong. There was nothing wrong or bad about the style at all.
Absolutely, convince me.
I might, or I'll try.
All right.
Because while I think you're right, for the most part, the style. This isn't a super stylized movie.
Exactly.
The style tries to get out of the way of the plot and the characters and things. Here's what I'll bring up. If I'm counting the callbacks as part of the style of the movie and not the dialogue, I will give it some points for that. That's by no means a deal breaker. I think the music was good.
I don't remember a lot of it. See, that's the thing.
I know
there was
good music. I mean, we mentioned the Beck song in the beginning of the movie.
That's the only thing I remember.
There were other good
felt
songs
it was kind of
as well.
It felt like a Judd Apatow opening.
Sure.
Just with a different song than he picked for other movies he did. And and he's produced this. It felt very like here's the things. Looking at the comedic angle of this, I don't go in thinking this is a comedy. I go in thinking this is a rom-com. So like all like the comedy aspects of it were great. But I don't know, I don't know, it's
not enough for me in my
what I will say about this, and this is where I may give it a 1, is there were some, while Emily was in the coma, there were some incredibly good shots that made me feel the alienation of, especially in the beginning of her coma. That made me feel the alienation of Camille. And I don't know if you guys remember any of these, but there was like through window shots.
I get what you mean,
and
when you're standing behind the plant.
Yes, there were some those were very
it's tough,
good.
Man.
Like in terms of the cinematography of those scenes, those shots were really good, and it didn't come through in like every scene in the movie wasn't like super stylized.
There were isolated spots of it, those you're saying,
but I really loved those shots, and they stand out in my head, and I'll remember those shots. That's going to be part of the movie that I remember going forward.
That's
the other items. I forgot
about them until you brought them up.
Like the other items that I mentioned are good. Like to me, they're good. They're interesting parts of the style, and they give it a little leg up. But that is really, if I'm going to give it a 1, that is really why I'm going to give it a 1.
You make a really convincing case, Steve-O, and it's solid, but I just don't think enough for me. Like again, I'm going back to what I just said. Even though you made a very impassioned argument for it, there's nothing wrong or bad about it. But it's like I think I like what you said. It gets out of the way of the rest of what is the movie. The movie is trying to focus on. So because of that, and yes, you're right. Those little isolated spots that sort of conveyed the alienation of Kamal. Yes, they were effective, but they were sort of like scattered, like few and far between. So like again, don't think I'm bad mouthing this movie on style. I just don't think I'm going to give it. If I'm going to take points away, it's going to be here, and I think it's still going to be that case. So that's all.
I'm more on Scott's side with that. And again, it's not to suggest that this is a flawed for not having more style. It's just
right.
And maybe the nature of its genre, but that's where I come down
with the 1.
Okay.
Now, let me ask you guys this, because this occurred to me several times in the hospital scenes. Did this remind you guys at all of Garden State?
Not really. Nah, I didn't think that myself watching the film. So
Maybe it's because I've seen Garden State fairly recently, but like it reminded me of. I actually like that movie. It holds up pretty well.
I remember enjoying
It's a
Garden
good movie.
State, but I haven't seen it in a while. So no, I did not think that. I didn't see any parallels or connections or reminders of it. So
Yeah, it's super twee, but whatever. I think it stands up, and like I'm glad I saw it again recently. But there's a scene with Braff and Portman in the hospital that reminds me a lot of like the hospital scenes in this.
I didn't think of that at all. So maybe it's because you just saw it recently. But
anyway,
I'm going with a 0.
I'm gonna stick with a 1. It's a softer one.
A very soft 0 for me.
But yeah, and that's a 0 for you, Ian.
Yes.
All right, so let's go on to recommendation. With me, I absolutely do recommend this movie, not only because it's nice to have something that makes you feel good, every once in a while, because we don't watch a ton of movies like that make you feel good at the end of
I don't feel good in life normally.
There you go. So like I emotionally connect with this movie. I thought I enjoyed it. It was a heartwarming movie, and it was also really well done, really funny, great acting, great direction, a good story that went somewhere. You saw character growth from all these people. For every reason that we've mentioned throughout, I'm going to give it a 1 for this.
It's a heartwarming ending that's earned.
Yeah, good call.
And it never felt
Cheap.
like it never felt like they were tugging at my heartstrings in a manipulative way. I thought they were telling a good story that happened to have a happy ending, and it could have gone. Honestly, I didn't know anything about this. I could have seen them not getting together. That could have very well have been the ending of this, and so it worked out well. And I do recommend it. I think that it's an enjoyable film.
But you're right; it didn't feel cheap that they did get together, which is an important distinction.
Yes,
I think.
exactly. I agree with that, and yeah, I'm strongly recommending it. Not, I was going to say oddly, but just for who I am and the type of stuff I normally enjoy, if you will, or normally just watch. And you're right; it's not. You don't often do this kind of film, and I was sort of trepidatious, I guess I'll say, coming into it. But now coming out of it, yeah, it's a goddamn good movie. Big Sick was solid as hell for everything we just said. Like you said, acting, the scripting, and the dialogue especially. It could have almost been like a dark comedy in like maybe some other universe, but they weren't going for that. But what it is a goddamn good film, and I definitely recommend it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we got our scores.
All right. So where does it leave us now?
All right, so Scott, myself, gave it 9s, and Steven gave it a 10. The big-hearted, emotional fool.
Now I'm gonna play Steve-O's part. Do you think it is in fact a perfect movie?
No.
Would you give it a 10 on an outside scale?
No, I don't think I would. But
Okay.
I think it gets a 10 in this scale. I think it would be
Pretty close.
a
then.
9 or a 9.5.
Oh, we give it 9.33,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is right in between a 9 and a 9.5.
That's pretty much
There you
it.
go.
So,
Very nice.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us, unless anybody else has anything else to say.
Check it out. Check out this movie.
We're going to bid you all adieu out there in viewerland. I've been Steve Ramosi, joined today by Jonathan Ian Mazer.
And the Grinch's heart grew twofold or whatever it was.
a little bit.
And the Grinch himself, Scott Thurlow.
Yes, and I will not be in a coma, but we'll see you next time. Good night.
Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.